I've always liked having starters for my applications, but ever since Vite came into the scene, I've rendered them useless. Turns out I was wrong. Hi, my name is Tomasz and I'm a former tech lead and manager. Today I want to show you my React starter. Looking back at the previous iteration of the starter, dated at late 2019, early 2020, I vividly remember that the hardest and most annoying part was hot reloading. Configuring it with Webpack and TypeScript was really mind breaking. And even if I was doing this ever since 20, I guess 16, I've always struggled. So when Vite came in and I've switched to it, I've rendered my starter completely useless because it had the most important part, HMR, out of the box. Recently, as I both started a channel that requires coding and came back to working with customers, I realized how wrong I was. Installing and configuring tools I am always using takes tremendous amounts of time. Even if I know the code by heart and I don't have to consult Plop or Storybook's documentation, I still have to manually type all those things. My last commission was a React application. I started to install the usual tools like Storybook, Plop, Tailwind, configure routing, configure test, and I realized it takes me tremendous amount of time. I finished my coffee, the album I was listening was almost up, and yet I was somewhere in the middle. So I thought to myself, why do I have to charge my customers for doing this every single time? And why do I have to do this excruciatingly boring thing every single time? This is why during the weekend I've decided to put together another starter and make it public. It's very opinionated, so it most likely won't be everyone's cup of tea, but that's why it's a public repo, so you can fork it and make it your own. Right, so let's jump to the code and see what's happening in there. If you've seen my video on design system scaffolding, you'll recognize most of the things I've put in here, but not without a few surprises. So I've decided to go with scalable solutions. Every space in here has its own directory which exposes a single index file. For UI, there's Tailwind and atomic design, so atoms, molecules, organisms, and views. Like I said, every directory has its own default export. Holding the entire view as a prop augmented solution might be a chore, but testing it then is very easy and straightforward. But I am first to admit that sometimes building a page as one file in the pages directory is just quicker and more productive given it's small enough. The choice is basically up to you. For API communication, I've put React Query, which has its own provider in here. In my experience, 90% of projects will still utilize REST, so it's a safer bet, but adding GraphQL and Apollo is just a breeze, another provider. And I've configured the default API address, so you don't have to specify the whole URL, but just the URI. It looks like this, and it takes the API URL and adds a slash, and just to be safe, replaces all double slashes with one slash. So if by mistake you have something like your API exactly, if your API ends with a slash and then your URI starts with a slash, then it will be turned into one slash. For routing, there is React Router. I was thinking about going with ScanStack, but I went with the popularity here, and given how the former caught up with the Tanner solution, I think it sticks. So there is pages directory, and in the main app we have the main routing. So you import pages and you just use them as elements. You might see this weird construct. This is an error boundary provider because normally every path can have its own error element that will render a React component whenever the error happens on the route. But I've made a global one, let's call it that way. And this is a funny hack that I had to do because error boundary by default requires fallback prop and doesn't accept this type. But nevertheless, this is a React error boundary, very small error boundary here. If you want to expand this, feel free. Coming back to pages, there are two types of pages. There are static pages exported from add pages, and there are lazy loaded pages exported from pages/lazy. So for the static exports, it's just that, right? You export this as a regular page, regular component, and then you import it. For the lazy ones, it's a bit more complex because you need to import it via lazy with React, and then there is a lazy factory utility that will help you create a suspense with fallback and then the component in question. So it's very easy. It just accepts the lazy component. Let's do it like this. It accepts the lazy component, and as a second parameter, it can accept another component as a loader. Whenever this thing is loading, it will just flash with this component. If it if you won't provide anything, it will take loading from atoms, which is just div would say with the word loading. So that's that, I guess. For business features, I've put a features directory. So in here you should keep all your business related things like in a single package. In here we have an example that has its own routing, that has its own screens, and has its own hooks and types. So you can obviously create a separate page. You can then export this page in here and import it in here, and you can of course use it as a lazy loaded. So to do this, just go with lazy factory, and instead of this, import, yeah, and single activity. Not quite that. Not quite that. Sorry, you guessed wrong. So single activity page, I like to call it, and then single activity, exactly like this. So it will just import the single activity and make it lazy. So that's that. If you want it. If not, you can just import it normally. What's important in the features is that it doesn't have to have routing. Right? This particular activity does have routing, and it exports with the lowercase like this, but it can be a React component that houses several others, like, I don't know, a cookie prompt, or it can be as big of a feature as a sign-up flow. It's all up to you. What's important is to keep this all in a single package. So when you decide to test it or replace it, you only do this in one place. As for tests, these are divided in two categories: units and integrations, and end-to-end. For unit and integrations, you should use Vitest. It's compatible with Jest, and I've added testing libraries packages to make sure all React and DOM assertions are there. Every .test.ts or .test.tsx will be picked by the Vitest and will be run. So if we go with npm t, it takes two tests because there are two tests in here. and just runs it. For end-to-ends, there is a separate directory controlled by Playwright. As much as I like Cypress, I think this is a better alternative, and all your tests should go into E2E directory. You can nest it, you can divide it into smoke tests and feature tests and whatever you want, but the most important part is that it should go to E2E, and there is a Playwright that has everything configured. One important thing to notice is that I've added a test E2E mocks, and this will build the application using mocked data, so no outgoing connection will happen. It will run preview, so this, and then it will run test end to end. So it will wait for localhost to spawn and then run Playwright. Let's see how it works. So you see it's building first, then it's running preview in here, and then it's waiting for localhost and running Playwright. Playwright was fired, running 6 tests with 5 workers, 5 tests passed, 6 tests passed, and once it's done, it exits with 0. Run -p is running 2 projects in parallel. If we would go with doing this next to each other, it wouldn't work, because preview doesn't exit by itself. It spawns a server that stays. That's why I had to use this. And -r is whenever one process exits with 0, so with the success code, all other processes are also killed with this process, this code. Sorry. Since we are talking about testing, let's talk about mocking. I've used MSW, which is, in my opinion, a standard for any kind of mocking communication, and it has its own mocks directory where you can define endpoints that will be used for both end-to-end and unit tests. MSW is bound to run on every unit test because it is configured like this, before all and after all, and after each test it resets the handlers. So if you do a delete on all the resources, the next test will be clear of that. And as for the mocks, it has browser files for browser, which is used in here. So if environment variable Vite mocks is true, we are starting this. If not, then simply return. And we have this enable mocks then. So for production, it will just run the function return and nothing will happen. But if you want the mocks, it will import the worker, start the service worker, and then create the root. Normally, you could probably use this as a sequential thing, but in my experience, this can happen a bit later than the create root, and that way you have race condition and you might end up not spawning the server fast enough. So this is just a safe bet. We have a node which creates a server, and this is used for testing, as mentioned. Server from mocks. Exactly. It also has its own handlers, and it's defined in this manner. You have some data, which is a JSON file. I mean, it's not a JSON file, but like a JSON adjacent collection. Yeah. And you just go with http.verb. So in this case, get, you put the full URL, not the URI, the full URL, and then you return the response. If you need parameters, like in here we have an ID, then you can extract this and do do any kind of logic you want to do. In my previous job, I've made persistent mocks, which were persisting between tests. So like we were trying to test a multi-page solution, so it had to create a user, then modify a user, and it was all happening on like a flat JavaScript object. So this all can be done. And in here, if activity does not exist, it returns not found with status 404. And if everything is fine, we just return JSON, which by default gives 200. If you remember my video about React design systems, you will remember plop. This is a generator of choice of for me, and I did it here, and it generates UI, utils, hooks, pages, and features, which is extremely convenient. It's nothing really fancy, it just allows you to pick whether you should use atom, molecule, organism, view, and then ask for a name. And it creates component, story, test, and does the export. Same with util, it just asks the name, create the util. Same with hook, it creates hook using testing library with hooks. Same with pages, and same with features. Let's see how it works. So npm run generate no UI, and yeah, atom some component UI atoms some component name. It created a story. Hello from storybook. It created a test, and it created a component itself. So that's all we actually need. And there is linting. First of all, there is a robust linting using ESLint. It's far more robust than my previous one that I've used in my previous video. It targets recommended type checks and stylistic type checks, and it also targets React with more robust set of rules, but it also has, and this is a bit funny probably, but it has import sorting. So whenever you import something that is wrong, like I don't know, you import a router as a last, which is a vendor, external vendor, it will just throw it in at the top because the order is types, vendors, internals. Not the most groundbreaking change, but I just like to have my imports ordered. When it comes to development and building, there's not many changes from the basic Vite config. Let's see, app builds into a, as you saw previously, app builds into a regular bundle. Lazy loaded files are extracted, not lazy loaded files are not extracted. CSS is a separate file, and obviously the index file is separate. When it comes to dev, it does basically the same, just doesn't extract anything. Yeah, so we are here. Everything works fine. One thing that is interesting in here is that I've added CDN extraction of the heaviest libraries. So React and React DOM are not bundled, but they are taken from a CDN. If we run preview, and go to the source, you will see that React and React DOM are taken as a script. I know that this might sound a bit wonky, but turns out there's a lot of people doing this, so your browser might have it cached already. So that's perfect. That's it. My starter for medium to large React applications. I invite you to fork, create pull requests and issues. It is most certainly a living project, as I often add tools to my, I don't know, shed. Well, nevertheless, thank you for watching till the end and happy coding.